on my way over here, right? I was excited to do this, but I was also anxious to do this,
Right.
right? Because it's like, I don't know exactly all the turns and corners we're going to go down with the conversation. And I could feel myself not getting to a high state of anxiety, but I was like, Darrell, you just need to be present to have a conversation with your friend.
Right.
And so as I was driving over here, I pulled up to a red light and I just went, and in that moment, my nervous system started to come down. I was just like, you know what? Just look around.
The Spiritual Shitshow Podcast with Suzanne Soul, episode number 19. Hello, all you superstars, and welcome to the Spiritual Shitshow Podcast, where we get into the funky, cold Medina the healing and spiritual awakening journey can be. I'm your host, Suzanne Soul, comedian, lifelong spiritual student, and I am beyond the beyond to be talking with my dear, dear friend, the Reverend Darrell Jones. He is an amazing minister. He's an incredible meditator. He's the author of Soul Gym, a fabulous book, and the facilitator of Soul Gym, the program. And he is an amazing spiritual counselor. I can attest personally. Me and Reverend Darrell Jones, Darrell Jones, Darrell Jones, Darrell Jones. We're gonna do a podcast. Let's roll it. Woo! Welcome, Darrell Jones.
Thank you very much.
To the Spiritual Shit Show, Interview Shit Show.
Let's get it.
And I'm so happy you can join me and to talk about and share your work with the people.
Hello, people.
Hello, people. Camera A, camera B. Camera A, camera B. Okay, so I checked out your website and it said bringing spiritual practices and exercises to the world to enrich the soul.
Yes.
Taking your study of the major world religions, philosophy, psychology, and quantum physics theory to expand your work as a minister and spiritual leader in the community, facilitating the awakening of inner wisdom in the individual, groups, and organizations. Tell me more.
Yes. Well, as you know, the world is a shit show. So this is your proverbial toilet paper.
Oh,
Yeah.
To wipe the shit show
To wipe the
off
shit
your
show.
butt.
There you go.
So tell me, can you expand upon the world as a shit show?
Yeah.
What are the things that you see that are the most problematic or that need toilet paper?
Yes. Probably the biggest is anxiety.
Yeah.
On the individual level, but it's not just at the individual. I think there's global anxiety.
Yeah.
There's group anxiety, and people, as we continue to be more advanced technologically, we are, I was going to say devitalizing, but it's not the right word. We're like turning down our capacity to handle challenge, discomfort, disintegration. People don't want to experience hardship.
Yeah.
And I get it. No one wants that.
Right.
But life is hard.
Right. And challenges, we need them.
We need them
to grow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the thing that's not computing, at least in the realm that I work in, is that there's an expectation that we'll get to a point where there isn't hardship.
Right.
And the fact that I am still experiencing hardship
not gonna lie
means something
Goals.
is wrong.
Right.
Right. And the challenge is then the toll that takes. That's where the anxiety comes in.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So I do a lot of work in the corporate space.
Right.
And in my mind, I had a story that I told myself. It's like once I got to some place career-wise, like if I was working in the right business, if I was in the right position, then there were people that I saw and they were kind of like the Wizard and the Wizard of Oz. Like I thought they were this great thing, but then, the curtain gets pulled back and you're like, whoa.
Yes.
Right?
I just want to mirror that by saying I experienced that same thing where I'm looking at someone who looks like they have it all.
Yeah.
And it's almost like I dehumanize them.
Mm-hmm.
by saying,
Absolutely.
they're this idealized version of a person
Yeah.
and I have to remind myself that they still have hardships too.
Yeah. Everybody does.
Yeah.
And yet everybody still dehumanizes, to use that
Right.
language,
Yeah.
right? And goes,
Right.
oh, someday I'll be like that superhuman.
Right.
I'll have this experience where everything looks great and I will feel great. But it's not that we can't feel great. It's not that we can't look great, but it's in that comparison space where a lot of anxiety amps up,
Right.
whether it is personal or it's professional.
Mm.
And so getting people to sit down for a moment and pause and do lots of things. First and foremost, just to sit down and pause.
Yeah.
We'll start there.
That's
Good
a
luck with
challenge.
that. Everyone's a 4-year-old in my book. Like it's like, sit down, sweetie, and they like get up and they run away. Sit down, get up and they run away. But getting people to sit down and pause, then to breathe, because most of us aren't really taking great breaths.
Our shallow breath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's enough to kind of just calm the nervous system enough for people to look around and go, oh,
Yeah.
this is what's actually going on.
May I ask?
Yes.
What do you think people ultimately are wanting from saying, I am wanting to come to this place in my life where there's no more problems, like we're saying. What is the catalyst for someone to desire that so much?
I don't know if there's one single catalyst. I think we all have our stories that kind of get us there. Most of us are trying to get away from something, right? That, our personal history, our family history, the literal country we live in. I mean, sometimes it's very tangible things. People need to get to safety.
Yeah.
But I think overall, I oversimplify it sometimes, but I still think it's true. In our modern day, nobody wants to experience discomfort.
Right.
And so everyone's trying to get to, live in the penthouse where everything's taken care of.
They're massaged every day.
Yeah.
And eat grapes.
Yeah, exactly.
How do I sign up?
Have someone tailor their clothes to fit them perfectly and have a chef that cooks their food. But on some level, it's like, can I even not have to do anything and just have the perfect body and never have the hardship of exercise or choosing to eat something that, doesn't come out of a bag, like actually have to touch food and prepare something. I just think it's really hard today, more and more so, for people just to kind of be and let that be enough. There's, in the mindfulness world, which is how I talk about a lot of this. So it's still, to me, it's always a spiritual conversation. But, going into a law firm, I have to respect that some people have religion or they don't have religion. They have spirituality, they don't have spirituality. They're not there to talk about that. They're there to work. And yet their business is like, yeah, but you're not working great. We need to do something to help you work better and greater. So finding a way to have this conversation without it getting a little too close to the heart in the corporate space. For me, it's all about mindfulness.
Yeah.
And the basic definition of that is being present.
Right.
But the default tendency of the human mind is to run away.
Yeah.
It really is.
Right.
I mean, I always say it goes back to us being animals.
Right.
If you have a dog or a cat or any, you take it out of its cage, you take it out for a walk, and it just immediately starts scouring and scanning to be like, am I cool?
Right,
Is
right.
anything coming to get me?
What do I need to look out for?
Right. And we still do that.
Sure.
Even though we've got phones and computers and we live inside buildings and we don't have to worry about weather in that same
Saber-toothed
way.
tigers.
Yeah. We still do that.
Right.
And so to get someone to stop and breathe and their mind can still go. They're still going to have worries and concerns.
Yeah.
But to go, I am sitting in a room where I'm actually 100% okay.
Right.
It sounds so simple, but
Right.
it's so hard for people to do.
Right.
And then depending upon their personal story, depending upon their work and the culture and the environment that they're in, it's easier for others and it's harder for others.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I mean, I'm all for wanting more success and having, financial abundance to be able to do the things I want to do. But for a lot of people that are only striving for that, it just perpetuates the anxiety of, I might lose it. I got to get more.
Or I don't have it yet.
I don't have it yet.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely experience that when I recognize, oh my gosh, I'm only thinking about, this future like desire. And I spent the whole last week not enjoying what is current in my life.
Right.
So you have recently, here it is. You launched an online spiritual community in 2015, which you call Soul Gym.
Yes.
And published a book of this with the same name, which I read and is wonderful.
Thank you.
So tell us about Soul Gym online community and the book.
Yes. Okay. So the story of how the book came to pass was we met in spiritual community, and supporting people in the community, praying with them after service, teaching classes and workshops, being a part of the worship team, and people being inspired and having that uplifting experience. The thing that I started to realize was that people would come to a Sunday service, or they'd come to a workshop, and they'd come to a one-on-one session with someone, and they'd have this like just bright light that would all of a sudden, bang, be really huge. And then it was almost like they'd walk out the front door, and like I watched it happen one day.
Wow.
Literally, this guy, his phone rang, he picked it up, and he picked it up with a smile on his face.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden he was like, what? And it was just like, you could see the life just kind of suck out of him. And I felt bad.
Yeah.
And, he came back the next week and was kind of like struggling with the thing that he was challenged with the week before. And I watched that over and over and over again. And it's not that, again, we have to get to a place where everything is resolved. But I started asking people, so what are you doing between Sunday and Sunday?
Yes.
And they're like, what do you mean? I'm living my life. I'm going to work. I'm doing the thing. I'm like, what are you doing to stay connected to this good feeling that you're having here right now? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, are you reading something inspirational? Are you listening to music that moves your heart? Are you doing some sort of meditation? Are you praying? And they're like, well, sometimes. I was like, oh, okay. And the more and more I took that inventory, I realized that people were not doing consistent work.
Yeah.
And my whole life, I've struggled with my body size and weight and flexibility and all the things.
Phenom.
Thanks. But the thing that the principle, I love principles, is that if I don't move my body, it's not going to get any stronger or more flexible.
Right.
So the principle that I've always realized for myself with my physical body is that if I don't exercise, if I don't even just do 20 minutes of walking every day, if I don't do something, if it's a push-up, whether it's against the wall or on the floor, if I'm not doing something to push my body to the edge of its current strength or flexibility, it's not going to go beyond it.
Is that right?
It's not.
I got to tell myself that.
As much as I, as much as I want it not to be true, that is the truth.
I'm like, are you listening, Suzanne?
But that same principle, I was like, that's what needs to be applied in the spiritual realm.
Right.
And,
I love that.
And to demystify a little bit some of the, what it needs to be, right? Like, there are high holy moments.
Yes.
There are rituals and altars and all the things that we can do.
Right, Monday through Saturday.
Yeah. But it doesn't always have to be like a high holiday. Right. You don't need to be like, well, I need a band to get me inspired. Like, I need you to come sing a song for me. Like, you can sit at your breakfast table and just take a beat before you eat. Or, I like that, take a beat before you eat. Or afterwards. But the goal is to do the consistent work.
Right.
And so
taking the beat to
pray,
to say a prayer,
to do 3 breaths,
to just center yourself in the present moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe instead of scrolling through your phone through all of breakfast, you actually just pick up a book and you find, an inspirational quote, and you just kind of like contemplate that for a moment.
Yeah, but let me circle back to
Yes.
the anxiety. I
Yes.
know for myself,
Mhm.
I mean, that is a challenge to get me right, to like open the book and just be like, just look at this prayer or this poem
Yeah.
or, and the breathing and getting
Mhm.
yourself in, to come down
Yeah.
to in your body. Yeah, it's a challenge.
So the whole idea with Soul Gym was like, okay, what if I created, and I intentionally wanted it to be virtual as opposed to physical.
Okay.
Because at the time, at least in 2014, 2015, I would say, why don't you come to this workshop? Why don't you come? And they're like, oh, I can't do that on Tuesday nights, too far.
Right.
And I was like, okay, let's not, I want to remove as many obstacles to people saying yes.
Yeah.
And the initial launch was it wasn't, super low tech. It was conference calls.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't even like Zoom.
Yeah.
But it was 2 to 3, 4 times a week. People could call in. They could participate in meditation and prayer, and it was done. Max 15 minutes.
15, okay.
And the whole notion was, oh, what if you could come to a place just for a few minutes? It's like working with a trainer. Whenever I work out with a trainer or I go to a class, I always push myself a little bit more than I'm like, oh, I'll just walk for 5 minutes. That's enough,
How about 2?
So to help people with accountability. And that to me is the purpose of gyms. Anytime I've gone to a gym, it's all about being accountable.
100%.
So I wanted, again, to apply that principle to people's spiritual life, not to try to make them believe anything, but just to connect to their spirit.
Yeah.
Right?
And that happens through practice.
That happens through practice.
Right.
And most importantly, consistent practice.
Right.
So that we're not on that yo-yo spike. It's a little bit more of just a slow burn up and a slow burn down. And the thing is that I say all the time is that we're not trying to stop ourselves from being anxious because that's a natural thing to happen.
Right. Okay.
We're not trying to stop ourselves from being fearful and angry because that's a natural emotional response for a human to have. However, what if we could be in relationship to it?
So how would we do that?
Through regular practice.
So in a moment, I'm in a state of anxiety.
Yes.
Okay.
But here's the thing. We can't do the oh shit moments. Most people go, I'm cool, so I don't need a practice. And then something happens and they're full-blown anxiety, like, what do I need to do to calm down? Right?
Yeah.
So it's the whole thing of, if you were to say, okay, I want to run a marathon. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and run a marathon.
Run 26K.
You have to start doing a little bit of exercise every day for at least 9 months to a year before you can do that.
So what I'm hearing you saying is that you're like tilling the soil so that when a moment comes up of a trigger, you have those at your fingertips.
Exactly.
Rather
so
than...
You're still going to be triggered.
Right.
But instead of triggered into a full-blown, for some people, anxiety attack.
Yes.
Right?
Definitely.
Maybe it's just like, oh my gosh, I need to leave.
Right.
Like, what if that could be a gift where all of a sudden you feel something is just, this is too much for me. And as opposed to staying there and kind of like working, you're just like, I need to leave and go for a walk.
Right.
I need to go call someone.
Right.
I need to, whatever it is that helps, that individual manage whatever's going on for them.
Right.
But so often I don't think anyone's doing exercise to raise that baseline.
Right. So that's what I was going to say. So I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
So that idea is to raise the baseline of your ground zero.
Yes.
And from where to where?
Well, it depends upon the individual.
Right. Of course.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
So let me.
That's very good point. Yeah. It's all relative.
For example, a 6'2" black man walking into a certain neighborhood is going to feel either more comfortable or less comfortable than you walking into that same neighborhood.
Okay.
Depending upon the time of day.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
So we are going to have very different experiences no matter what we do.
Right.
But we can both walk into that neighborhood and still have a relationship with whatever feelings of comfort or discomfort we may have.
Right.
But for you to get there and for me to get there are going to be very different journeys.
Right.
But the bottom line principle is, what are we doing to get ourselves present with ourselves.
Right.
Right. The analogy that I like to use to help people understand the power of regular practice. Nobody expects their teeth to be perfect. Because if you did, you would not brush them every day.
Right.
You would think, oh, I'm going to get to that point where I can just brush my teeth on Monday for 30 minutes and I'm good.
Forever.
No. Everybody knows you have to do it at least twice a day.
Right.
At a minimum twice a day.
Right.
And does that mean that there isn't wear and tear, that you don't have to do some deeper work sometimes? No, you still got to do that too. But if you weren't brushing your teeth twice a day, be pretty jacked up in there.
Right. And if you ate a piece of candy, your tooth might actually just
Right.
fall out.
Right. So think about the stress of coffee,
Right.
a piece of candy,
Right.
sugars, acids, everything that we're putting into our mouth.
Mm-hmm.
We don't make those things wrong. We don't actually try to, some people eliminate some of the things,
Yeah.
but for the most part, we consume what we need to consume.
Right.
But we also know we're doing this thing twice a day that keeps the baseline of our oral health
Wow.
at a space that it can handle the stress
Wow.
of what we eat.
Yes.
So what if we could get our baseline of our emotional, mental, spiritual, nervous system up to a space that's not about not having a reaction, but we can handle the inevitable triggers and stresses that come into our life?
I'm having like a light bulb. The light has just been turned on for Suzanne.
Okay, tell me about that.
Of what you're sharing, in that I'm not just doing the practice for the sake of doing the practice because I should, or I think it'll make me feel better in some way. I'm doing it to help me handle life.
Yes.
And when I think of it like that, it really inspires me and turns the light on and says, yeah, that's a very necessary thing to do, because life never stops lifing.
Absolutely.
And thinking of strengthening my spiritual practice and my meditation and my mindfulness and my breath work, so that when those things come along, I don't get completely thrown and derailed.
Exactly.
Is wow.
It's so simple, but it's so complex. I mean, we make it more complex, but so an example was just on my way over here, right? I was excited to do this, but I was also anxious to do this.
Right.
Because it's like, I don't know exactly all the turns and corners we're going to go down with the conversation. And I could feel myself not getting to a high state of anxiety, but I was like, Darrell, you just need to be present to have a conversation with your friend.
Right.
And so as I was driving over here, I pulled up to a red light and I just went. And in that moment, my nervous system started to come down. I was just like, you know what? Just look around. You need to park your car. That's the only thing you need to focus on right now.
And what I'm hearing is that your neural pathways get, solidified, and so that when you take that breath, your mind and body are prepped to know that that is a healing and soothing action.
Yes.
And that they the mind and body respond to that in a much stronger way, because it's something that is part of your everyday.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's muscle memory.
Yeah.
Right. So the fact that I did some prayer work this morning, the fact that I did some meditation yesterday, the fact that I read something inspirational 3 days before, the fact that I listened to some other podcast that inspired me, and I'm just keeping myself touching these concepts.
You listened to another podcast? No, I'm kidding.
In that moment, all of a sudden I had awareness of let me just reconnect to, in the spiritual world, we say, let me connect to my truth. What's actually real, not this story that I'm telling myself that could send me down a pathway of, shallow breathing, not thinking, not paying attention. I mean, I always invite people in a workshop to say, how often do you go somewhere and you're like, how did I get here? You don't remember what turn you took.
Yes, because you were on autopilot.
Totally. And most of the day we're moving that way.
Yeah.
And to, again, get ourselves to stop and pause and breathe, all of a sudden gives us access to one of the most powerful things on the planet that most people take for granted.
Which is?
Our attention. Where we place our attention and the attitude with which we place it in the moment is the thing that determines our actual experience.
Right. What is it goes that where attention flows? What is it?
Oh yeah, where your attention goes, energy flows as well.
Energy flows. Okay, where attention goes, energy flows, meaning what you're putting your attention on, you're giving energy to.
Yes.
And causing energy from all the energy areas to go, oh, we're going here.
Yes.
That's amazing. Okay, I want to ask you, I got to just find my little thing here. Okay, so you received your ministerial license by the Centers of Spiritual Living, and your father was a minister.
He was.
And inspired your path toward ministerial training, but you really found your own personal passion for spiritual philosophy and practice through the teachings of science of mind and other new thought teachings. So tell me about that experience that got you from, to becoming like, I want to walk the ministerial path.
Okay. So to use the language of your show, the shit show for me, inside my head for the majority of my youth, young adult years until maybe in my 30s was I had to do something right to look good in the eyes of God, my parents, my wife, my friends, my community. And as long as I did whatever I had to do to make sure that everyone was looking at me and smiling and going, oh, Darrell, you're such a good guy, then I would do it.
Yep.
But I was crushing myself inside.
I mean, you're not alone. That is
I was the
universal.
king and still am the king of codependence. Like, am I really doing it because I like you? Right. Am I just doing it because it's going to make me feel good about that's the dark side of it,
and you have to check in. Yeah.
So when the thing that really changed my life in an awesome way, but I don't want anyone to go through it, was divorce.
Okay.
I was married once before, and I knew what happened, but I didn't quite know what happened. And I went to therapy, and I always joke in workshops when I tell this story, it was prior to the internet. So it's like, I didn't have the convenience of scrolling through my phone. I was sitting in, I'd get a coffee and go into Borders and sit in the self-help section on the floor, and like whatever Oprah had up and whatever Deepak Chopra was talking about, like I would pull all those books down, and everything was about awareness. Yeah. And when I stumbled upon Ernest Holmes and the science of mind, and this idea in terms of using a spiritual practice to train the mind to move in a different way than it had previously, I was like, wow, what if I could do something to train my mind to have a different relationship with relationships? What if I didn't have to always show up and kind of crush myself in order to be in a relationship? And I'm still practicing that every day, trying to be better in that. But it was, I guess the catalyst for it was finding some of these teachings that the mind is not just this static thing.
Right.
It is constantly learning and evolving. But if we aren't doing something to exercise it, coming back to the whole soul gym, if we aren't doing something to exercise it, then it's just going to keep performing in the same way that it always has.
Right.
And I was not interested in having the same relationship with my own mind and my thinking. And in particular, I really wanted to have a relationship with an idea of God, spirit, universe, life. But I realized that the teachings of my family and of origin didn't work for me.
Right.
I'm not saying that they're wrong.
Right. They just didn't speak to you.
They didn't speak to me, and it wasn't something that would pull me out of some of my own personal mental behaviors that were going to support me for a healthier life. Right. So I was very angry with God when I first came into this teaching.
Because of the divorce and...
No, well, I don't even know if I was angry about the divorce. It was the idea that God does something to you.
Got it. Like you're being punished.
Yes. So I was very much in the space of a little bit of powerlessness where I
Sure.
couldn't control anything.
Yeah.
And if God was so good, then why is this bad thing happening to me?
Yeah.
Why are all these bad things happening in the world? Why, why, why?
Yeah.
And so it was very, very, we talk about that victim mindset
Yeah.
and consciousness of that things only happen to
you.
us, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the idea of like, oh, I can partner with God, I can partner with the divine, and we can work on something together to change myself, a relationship, something in the community. That's a really radical, powerful notion
Yeah.
that I did not grow up with. And that's what really got me into the teaching. And then the more and more I started reading about it and, looking at practices like forgiveness, and that's where I really found meditation.
Was it that you felt like you could be involved in the process and that God wasn't this overlord, but
Yeah.
more of a partner in your life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, again, it was just so radical to me. Like, what?
Like, yeah. Oh my gosh, me too. When I actually had the experience of, I used to go to Agape in Los Angeles, and that was where I first heard Dr. Michael Beckwith.
Yeah.
And everything he was saying, I was like, that's what I've been thinking the whole time.
Yeah.
He's saying it.
Yeah.
So I totally get that kind of moment when you hear those teachings that give you the opportunity to have a more visceral relationship.
Yes.
With God.
Yes.
With spirit.
With spirit.
Yeah.
And I was always interested in more. I grew up in a Christian household.
Yeah.
And my father was pretty far left of center.
Okay.
In terms of, I wasn't baptized until it was my choosing.
Okay.
So I wasn't baptized until I was 14.
Wow. Okay. Love that.
So it was a very, for being a preacher's kid, it wasn't heavy at all. But the institution, I did not like. Like, I loved the teachings of Jesus. I loved the stories. I loved the principles that were brought out there. But oftentimes in the organizations, I was just like, it does not make any sense.
Yeah.
What you're doing organizationally and structurally, it doesn't even fit with the teachings.
Yeah.
My father, again, was very far left and radical for his time. They almost lost their charter because they had an openly gay deacon. And he was like, we're not going to ask this person to leave the community. We're not going to ask them to step out of leadership because they're actually one of the most powerful leaders in the community.
Yeah.
So no. And they stood up to and so in my mind, I was like, well, this makes sense.
Yeah.
But as I left home and I went into other churches and communities, I was like, oh, no, this is not what I grew up with.
Right.
So I threw everything out. I was like, screw it.
Yep. Threw the baby out with the bathwater. I think a lot of us who got into the New Thought, I think we went all through that experience where we were like, this doesn't make sense to me, so nothing.
And then you had to kind of like rebuild,
Yeah.
For yourself. And again, that was the thing that was so beautiful when I first found the writings of Ernest Holmes. It was like, oh, I can rebuild and recreate and define for myself what this relationship is.
Yeah.
And I don't have to be separate, but I still remember going home to visit my parents, and I'd be so mad I wouldn't say, we would say like the rote prayers in church, and for some reason I couldn't even utter the word God.
Yes.
I would say all the other words but God.
Yeah.
It was so weird.
Because of that version of God that didn't sit right.
Where I was in my journey at the time. I was still
I also
healing.
did experience that as well.
Yeah.
And I have moved beyond that now where I'm able to go into maybe a Catholic church because that's where I grew up and enjoy and say along. But I went through that same stage when I was on the beginnings of my journey where I was like, I wouldn't speak along. I would sit, and if we were at a family event, because I was still sussing out my experience of God.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I totally appreciate that.
I think that's, the arc that I hope everyone can actually go on, right?
Right.
Not everyone will, but I'm very grateful every day that I have that level of connection. And again, I attribute it to not thinking a certain thought, like I have to believe this one thing, other than I can have a relationship with the divine of my own creation.
Yeah.
Again, that's really radical, I think.
Yeah. So you heard these teachings when you started going to Bodhi.
Yes.
And then got into the teachings of Ernest Holmes.
Yes. So I'll quickly make the story short because it might just be interesting. 2003, when it was originally the Chicago Center for Spiritual Living, I was doing the musician.
Yes.
I was gigging.
Right.
And Kim and Marianne were like, hey, you got to come check out this dude, Mark Anthony Lord. And I was like, his last name is Lord? Are you kidding me? They're like, yeah, we're meeting in his living room. I'm like, you're meeting in his living room? And like all of my like...
Yeah, but Kim knew him forever.
Forever.
Yeah.
But we were still fairly new friends. I mean,
Yeah.
we just knew each other from a little bit of the music circles. And I was like, you know what? No, I'm not going to go hang out in some dude's living room. I was very, very skeptical of everything at that point.
Right.
Still intrigued and interested. So I went to the first service, and literally the second week, I was a part of the music team. And within 3 months, I think I was helping Mark Anthony with some just administrative stuff. Within 6 months, I think I quit my job.
Yes.
And found myself just like fully, I signed the original charter when because they had to have 50 people say that they were members in order to be considered a full-blown organization.
Oh, okay. I never knew that. Interesting.
And so then I just was working there. And really the way that I got into meditation is I was the sound engineer.
Oh my gosh.
And we would play music at the beginning of service.
Right,
and
the meditation
pull
music.
the music up. And then 5 minutes, 2 minutes before the end, I'd pull it down. And I was just sitting there. I'm like, well, I might as well meditate with these people. And started having this really cool experience.
Yeah.
And it was every week. It was consistent.
So what were some of the teachings that really pulled you in?
So I really, really liked the prayer.
The affirmative prayer.
The affirmative prayer.
So what were the teachings of the New Thought movement and the Science of Mind teachings that really pulled you in to want for you to really start to get more and more involved?
Sure. So the big thing was the idea that there was a science to our mind. And that, again, in terms of feeling empowered, that we could do something to shift how we thought and our relationship to our thinking. And then in the spiritual context, to change our relationship with God. And so the spiritual mind treatment, or the affirmative prayers, 5 steps. And all of a sudden I realized, I was like, oh, I don't really pray. Like I would do some of like the Our Father and all of those things that you learn as a good Christian kid. But I didn't have a prayer life that was like devotional, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Where I was freestyling, if you will.
Right. Like you were communing.
Yeah. I wasn't really having a conversation with the divine of my own being.
Yes.
And this 5-step prayer was like, here is a way that you can easily step into this.
Right.
So first, recognize who God is, like not as a thing outside, but like the qualities of the divine. So love, joy, sufficiency, abundance, forgiveness, truth, wholeness. And then to not only recognize that that is the inherent nature of God, but then this is where it gets really juicy, is to unify. So the next step is to say, okay, I recognize this is what God is, but I unify myself with that, right? So like, not only is this notion of God good and whole and complete and beautiful and joyful, if I am what God is and God is who I am, then I am also beautiful, joyful, abundant, loving, and wise. And so then from that place, let me speak a word now. Let me realize something. What is it that I want to realize more in my mind, heart, body, and soul? That I am enough. I am enough as I am. I'm so grateful. So we go into the next step. I'm so grateful for the fulfillment of enoughness. I'm so grateful to know that I am enough. And so I let this prayer go, and so it is. Amen.
So it's recognize,
unify, realize,
realize,
thanksgiving,
thanksgiving,
and so it is.
And so it is. Amazing. So affirmative prayer was a really big factor, something
Yes.
that really spoke to you.
Yes.
And what are other teachings that
Oh my
really?
goodness. Well,
So many.
well, the basic premise, that we are not separate from life, right? And that everything is in a constant state of creativity. So you kind of like, wow, quantum physics, but we literally had a class about quantum physics in ministerial school
Yes.
from the basic notion that everything is vibrating, right? And that everything is energy.
Right.
And it's only as things continue to vibrate in a certain way that this actually turns into a leaf.
Right.
Right? Now, it's really trippy for us to try to figure that out here because we're at this very dense level where we don't see things vibrating.
Yeah.
But in quantum research and study, they take those microscopes and go down to that level where it seems like there's really nothing there and things are just light and energy. And you can see that, oh, wow, what's vibrating that's known as all the cells that make up Suzanne is the exact same thing, and all the cells that make up Darrell is the exact same thing that makes up this leaf, that makes up this chair. And it's
mind-blowing.
trippy, but it was just another like way of having some fodder, I guess, if you will, to understand God in a different way.
Right.
Not just as this like lofty thing out there that you can't.
Like this guy, man in the sky with a beard and a robe.
It helped unify things for me.
Right.
And
because that's more of an experiential experience of God.
Yeah. And one of the other things about this that really spoke to me, so I love the work of Paul Ferrini in the 12 Steps of Forgiveness.
Yes.
Because I realized I needed to do a lot of healing and forgiving of mostly myself.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the things that influences my relationship with spirituality, in particular why I like a lot of the New Thought traditions, is I was born in a multi-race family. So I grew up with different cultures. And not only in my own family, but where I literally grew up, I went to a Jewish preschool, a Catholic kindergarten, then I went to public school until my sophomore year, then I went to a private school, but it was not religiously affiliated.
Right.
It was just, we were all super nerds.
Right.
And everyone learned, but there were still kids there that were atheists, agnostic, Muslim, Jewish, Christian.
Wow. What a wonderful experience.
It was a very unique experience. And so there wasn't, when it came to religion and spirituality, for most people, it's not just this separate thing, it's their culture.
Right.
And so I could not find a culture that was inclusive, if you will, a spiritual culture.
Right.
It's like, okay, you're cool if you're not Christian, but you're not Christian.
Right.
You're cool if you're not Muslim, but you're not Muslim. You're cool if you're not Jewish, but you're not Jewish.
Right.
Right? So there was, where can we all come together?
And celebrate.
And that's what I found was, the fact that the founding minister of Bodhi was a gay man was like, okay, that was a good check of like, okay, there's some inclusion.
Yes.
And then the music that was played and then the age ranges of people that attending it wasn't just, like a bunch of young people or a bunch of old people, because most of the congregations that I had gone into, that's what it was. So there was the actual technology of prayer and the studies, but then it was also the community.
And I also really enjoy the New Thought spiritual centers because they feel like people are purposefully there for their own personal spiritual journey, not because it's something they have to do or should do or, or whatever. It's just like they're there. I am here 100% by choice. I love that too.
And that's a unique thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to first share with everyone what you offer online, where people can find you.
Okay. So I'm launching new. So 2025, this is going to be 10 years that I've been doing Soul Gym. Yeah. When I first launched, most spiritual communities weren't doing a whole heck of a lot virtually.
Yes.
And ever since the pandemic, everyone's doing things. Right. So I'm kind of in a space of refashioning.
Sure.
First and foremost, if you go to revdarrelljones.com, that's where I'll be posting things.
Great.
I am going to be launching a new website called gosouljym.com.
Love it. Go, G-O.
G-O.
Soul.
You better go, Soul Jim. Hey. That will be coming probably sometime in the first quarter of 2025.
Great.
But right now, I am doing workshops online. I do one-on-one coaching with individuals. I do go into the corporate space so I can be hired to come, and it has nothing to do with religion. It doesn't even have to have anything to do with spirituality. It's all mindfulness based. So it's a very secular conversation.
Very good.
But these principles are not bound by anything. So you find language. In Chicago, I speak usually once a month at a community called Cityside.
Very good.
But you may find me here and there in other places as well. But everything is at revdarrelljones.com.
Excellent. Would you close us out with an affirmative prayer?
Absolutely. Can I pray for something in particular?
Let's do an affirmative prayer that the person who is listening to this or watching this podcast today really gets fed.
Okay.
And enlightened in some way.
Okay. Great. So I like to close my eyes and bring my hand or hands up to my heart. It's just a way of me connecting. You can choose to do that or not. And in this moment, what I recognize is when I bring my hands to my heart, it reminds me of one thing, in that there is a power and presence within me that is whole, that is loving, that is creative, and is free. And I know that this is not something exclusively only within me. It is in all of life. It is in my life. It is in Suzanne's life. And it is in the life of everyone listening and watching this podcast today. We are all one with this same creative goodness. And so from that place of oneness, I speak a word of intention that there is some inspiration from this conversation today, that something has been awakened, that something has been renewed. Maybe if it got a little dusty. What I just say is that right here, right now, we are all finding ourselves connecting to something deeper than we knew even just a few minutes ago. And now we say yes to that deepening, to that connection, amplifying and continuing to express and expand from this moment forward. And I say yes to anyone who's wanting to do some regular practice to raise that baseline of their spirit, mind, and soul, that all they have to do is take a breath right now. And with that, the practice has begun. And so I say yes to many, many more moments of getting present and practicing, recognizing the power and presence of the divine. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to connect with my beloved friend Suzanne and to have this conversation and to have this be an inspirational podcast for all. And so I let this word be, I let our time be, and know all is well. And so it is.
And so it is. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Darrell Jones. I love you so much.
I love you too.
You are such a gift to the world. Thanks for joining me on this shit show.
Absolutely.
Love you.
I wouldn't stink it up anywhere else.